Hello, and welcome to ByzantineChant.org. I'm Nicholas Jones, and I will be taking you through an introduction to Byzantine chant, especially for Western musicians coming with a Western theory background. Byzantine chant is composed of only two parts in general, the major part being the melody, which provides you with word painting for all the words, and the eson, which gives you the underlying foundation of the harmonic structure. Now there's only two parts. Every so often you will find three parts depending upon the hymn, sometimes in the Lamentations on Holy Friday, and sometimes in such countries such as Romania they might write things in three parts. The eson is essentially the fundamental basis note of the melodic structure. The eson essentially represents the uncreated light of God, the unwavering uncreated light of God that stems throughout the entire creation of the world. And so this eson establishes the melody and gives it an unwavering character, and this is the drone part that is written underneath the melody. The melody is the unified voice of the church, and this melody is something that we say together in the same way that we say the creed together, so we also sing the melody together, and this melody helps to illustrate what is being said by the words and helping to word paint. So if we're talking about something in heaven, we go high. If we're talking about Hades, we go low. We try to word paint with this melody as an added aspect for the understanding of the people of God. Now before moving into the more fundamental structure of Byzantine chant and how to read the notation, first we must understand the nomenclature used for the scales. In general, most people are probably familiar, from the sound of music, with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, or ti, do. Now, all throughout the world, there are two different schools of thought on this system. In America, oftentimes you have a movable do system, where do can be sitting on any pitch of the musical scale, whether it be C, D, E, anything like that. But throughout a lot of Europe, it's a fixed do system, such that do is always C, re is always D, mi is always E. Byzantine chant has a similar set of scales, such that it's ni, pa, vu, ga, di, ke, zo, ni, where you have this apostrophe at the top, meaning you're up the octave. This is how it's written in Greek, and oftentimes how you'll see it written in music. Now when comparing these two systems, the Byzantine system is always a relative system. Ni is never fixed on a certain pitch, although at certain times in history it was attempted to fix it at a certain frequency. But ni is normally chosen, or any note for that matter, the scale, the position of that scale is chosen based upon the people who are singing. So if you have a lot of basses or altos singing, you might bring the whole scale to a lower pitch to accommodate those singers. If you have a lot of tenors or sopranos singing, you might raise the pitch to accommodate those singers. One major difference between the Western and the Eastern scale is the distance between these notes. In the Western sense, you have a major scale and a minor scale, and with the minor scale sometimes you get into harmonic minor and melodic minor. But in general, if you're dealing with a major scale, you have a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step between the notes. In Byzantine chant, however, there are four major scales that we're going to deal with, which will tell us the distance between ni and pa and vu and ga, all the way up the scale. And these vary depending upon the tone that you'll be singing in. And we'll talk about tones in a minute, but in general, the distance between ni and pa and do and re in the Western sense is not always going to be the same. Now to use the nomenclature of ni, pa, vu, ga, di, ke, zo, ni, we need to know the intervals between those different notes of the scale. So we have four major scales that we deal with in Byzantine chant: the diatonic scale, the soft chromatic scale, the hard chromatic scale, and the enharmonic scale. These are, in general, the full scales that go straight all the way from ni to ni, or pa to pa. There are smaller sets of scales that will help to nuance the music and give us some sort of quality depending upon what words need to be painted. But these are the full scales that we'll be dealing with. The diatonic scale and the enharmonic scale are probably the most familiar to people with a Western ear. The enharmonic scale is actually very similar to the Western scale of whole step, half step, whole step, half step. The diatonic scale, however, is slightly different, such that as we see over here, the diatonic scale and all these scales will tell us the distance between each set of notes. So instead of it being 12, 12, 6, 12, 12, 12, 6, as it might be for the enharmonic scale, the diatonic scale is 12, 10, 8, 12, 12, 10, 8. And this numeral system that I'm using here is a certain amount of commas between an octave, where in an octave you have a doubling of the frequency. So A440 means that you have A at 440 hertz, and if you go up the octave to the next A, you have A at 880. So if we divide that, instead of doubling, if we divide that section into 72 steps, now we can get a different set of commas. So then all of these will add up to 72 to get from ni to ni. And so here, what we might have normally as ni pavugali kezoni. Instead, here, to approximate it a little bit, would be ni pavugali kezoni zokeli gavupani. So you end up having a vu that is slightly flatter, and a zo that is slightly flatter. And in fact, on the way down, because of the way that our ear hears it, we oftentimes flat zo even more. Now, when we get to the soft chromatic and hard chromatic scales, we'll get to different intervals in between these notes. But for the moment, we'll stick with the diatonic scale, or something approximating that for the Western ear, to understand how the notation fits into this structure. Now, before learning the notation for Byzantine notation, first we must understand how Byzantine notation compares to Western notation in terms of the staff versus the neumes that we have here. In Western notation, we have different lines of music that are read from left to right. Similarly, in Byzantine notation, we have a line of symbols that are read from left to right, and in that line of symbols, those symbols, if there's more than one on a certain spot, you read them from bottom up. And I'll mention that in future lessons as we go through some exercises. Now, the difference between Western and Byzantine notation is that in Western notation, there's kind of a middleman in between sight reading. You have a 5-line staff, and you see a note, let's say an F on the first space of a treble clef, and you have an A on the second space of a treble clef. In between those two notes, you see an F and an A. You know, okay, that's a major third, so therefore let me sing a major third between those two notes. Instead, with Byzantine notation, you see a symbol which says, relative to the note that you are currently on, in the scale that you're currently singing on, go up 1 note, or go up 2 notes, or jump up 3 notes. And therefore, you kind of take out the middle man, and it implies an understanding of the scale that you're dealing with and where you are in that scale. But nevertheless, you, instead of having 5 lines to read, you have 1 line of music and 1 line of words. So it assists with sight reading new words, especially in long Orthodox services. Now, in these lines of music, there's different notation, and here we'll go through just some basics. I've written the ni pa vu ga di ke zo ni scale up here for when we get through a few exercises. But first, there's 3 symbols that we must be familiar with. First, we have a symbol that means stay the same from the previous note, a symbol that means go up 1 from the previous note, and a symbol that means go down 1 from the previous note. The first symbol is called the ison. The next one, oligon, and the apostrophos. Now, these symbols, when combined together, they can form a very simple melody, such that if I were to write an ison, followed by an oligon, and an apostrophos, then we have, if we start on ni, ni, pa, ni, and so we go from left to right, and we would have ni, pa, ni. Now, to make the melody a little more complicated, there are a few other symbols that are used for vertical motion, specifically just for up 1. Now, these symbols are the petastis and the kentimaton. Now, these both mean up 1, but they have 2 different functions, especially depending upon the structure of the language that's being used. Here we'll be dealing with English. The petastis functions as a stressed symbol, and normally it is accompanied by a flutter, such that you might go ni, pa, ni, and this would mean that you have a stressed syllable on this note, and it's used for stress in a melody. Now, if you have a kentimaton, this is an unstressed syllable, and will never start a new syllable unless you're dealing with certain nonsense syllables, teririram or neon no. But in general, with regular words, this would never start a new syllable, what would rather be elided with the previous symbol. So it would still sound ni, pa, ni, but if we wrote that in there, it'd be la, la, as opposed to la, la, la. So here we have the regular 0, up 1, down 1, and some qualitative symbols that help to understand the notation. Now you can combine the pentastis with the apostrophos, and you can get a symbol that looks like this, which means that you're going to go down, but it's going to have the quality of a pentastis. So here you would have a going down symbol that is stressed, and if there's enough time in the music, you would also flutter. Now here I've put 3 different exercises up on the board, using, here we have the basic stay the same, up 1, down 1, down 1. Here we have the pentastis being incorporated, and we have stay the same, up 1 with a stress or a flutter, and down 1, down 1. And then we have here the kentimaton, up 1, or stay the same, up 1 unstressed, up 1 regular, and down 1, down 1. Now here you might wonder, well, where do we start? So what they do is there are certain martyrios, or witnesses to the music, which tell us where to begin and where we are in the middle of a phrase or at the end of a phrase. And these will be lowercase letters of the Greek alphabet. So in this case, I'll say that we'll start on ni. So I'll put a little nu there, and since we'll be singing in something like the diatonic scale, we'll put a symbol that tells us that this ni is in the diatonic scale. So if we follow this along, we start ni, pa, vu, and we go back down to pa, and ni. So then we start on ni, we'll end on ni, so therefore we'll put another martyria over here to let us know as a checkpoint that if we get lost, we should be on ni at this point. So this would go ni, pa, vu, pa, ni. Now the difference here, we'll still start on ni, pa, vu, pa, ni, with a little flutter and a stress. And here, you might see it written like this, or you might actually see these barred together to tell you that it's one syllable. This is still 2 notes, but on 1 syllable. And this would be similarly ni, pa, vu, pa, ni. But the way you would sing it in music is la, 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 la. All these go from ni to ni. Now as we're going there, if we were to change this such that we go ni, pa, vu, pa, vu, ga, vi. We put a new symbol over here to tell us we're on the in the diatonic scale. And so then ni, pa, vu, ga, di. And I highly recommend that when you're going through the exercises online, or when you're going through music for the first time, it is helpful to put right in the different notes, or to sing it paralagi, which is using these solfege syllables in the Byzantine scale, as a way of checking your progress. Eventually you can just use la, or use the words that are written in the music. As you look through hymns, there's, in general, 3 different types of hymns that you'll find: the irmologic, the stichiraric, and the papatic hymns. Irmologic hymns are the brief style hymns, where these are sung in a rather quick fashion, and these normally have 1 syllable per note, or 1 note per syllable. The stichiraric are a slower version, which are normally maybe for bigger feasts or when there's more time in the services, and these normally have multiple notes per syllable. Papatic hymns are normally for very long communion hymns, or especially for the cherubic hymns, when you need to take up lots and lots of time because of what the priests are doing, or what the deacons are doing, or what is necessary to be done in the service. And so these are very slow, and these have very long melismatic lines of notes that are associated with 1 syllable, and you may even have more nonsensical syllables in the middle to fill in the space. So these are different types of hymns that you may find. In general, I would suggest starting with the irmologic, because these will be the easiest to read, and will have the least variance in different phthora, the changing of scales, or different rhythmic symbols that might complicate things in the stichiraric or the papatic, and it's easier to follow what note you're on because you have 1 syllable per note. Here sometimes you can get lost unless you actually go along with your finger, or try and keep track of it in some different way. So for ByzantineChant.org, I'm Nicholas Jones, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you.